CQ, this is Romeo Bravo 178. CQ for emergency traffic. CQ, Romeo Bravo 178. CQ, Romeo Bravo 178, standing by.
Hello YouTube, this is KG5 Radio here, and today we're going to be discussing my thoughts on the Channel 3 plan, and I'm also going to throw a little tidbit in there about the amateur radio calling frequencies. Okay, before we go in detail about the Channel 3 plan, I thought I'd take you through a little bit of the background of the radio services that are used on the Channel 3 plan. CB, or Citizens Band, is a radio service that's mainly used by over-the-road truck drivers. About 95% of all semi-trucks are equipped with a CB radio, and indeed you can also find them in other semi-truck derivatives such as tow trucks, certain heavy-duty box trucks, and certain heavy-duty flatbed trucks. CBs are also a very popular installation option on Jeeps and four-wheel drive vehicles. Mainly they use CB radio to communicate with each other while they're driving through off-road trails. However, I'd say that about 23% of all Jeeps and four-wheel drive vehicles are equipped with a CB radio, which is in stark contrast to the 95% of all semi-trucks equipped with them. Now, FRS is a commonly used short-range radio service meant for use by families, as the name would imply. You can commonly find the radios at the big box sporting goods stores, and they're often sold nowadays as a FRS GMRS combo unit. Basically, that means that they could do both the family radio service and the licensed general mobile radio service in one radio. Now, MERS is a license-free VHF service, much like FRS, with the exception that FRS is in the UHF band, and MERS is in the VHF band, which gives it certain advantages. However, you don't see too many MERS radios these days. I think Dakota Alert makes a MERS handy-talkie and a MERS base station, but that's about the only official MERS radio I've seen, aside from commercial VHF radios, which are programmed with MERS channels in them. And my last little tidbit here about the general mobile radio service is that while it is a licensed service and is technically not part of the Channel 3 plan, I believe it has a role in the whole scheme of things due to the fact that the 7 simplex only channels are compatible with the FRS radios in the Channel 3 plan. And indeed, the first 7 frequencies of FRS are shared with GMRS. So in an emergency or a natural or man-made disaster, licensed GMRS operators could successfully communicate with their unlicensed FRS users on the first 7 channels. Okay, here's some technical specs of the Channel 3 plan. CB Channel 3 is 26.985 megahertz, and that uses amplitude modulation, although a single sideband is also available. But for the purposes of the plan, you will use AM modulation since the majority of over-the-road truck drivers use AM CB radio. MERS is almost universally using frequency modulation, and it's at 151.940 megahertz, which puts it right above the 2-meter amateur radio band. And the FRS GMRS channel 3 is also an FM modulation channel, except it's at 462.6125 megahertz, which is about 65 centimeters or slightly above the 70 centimeter amateur radio band. Okay, here's a basic overview of how the Channel 3 plan works. Every 3 hours, for 3 minutes at the top of the hour, you turn on your radios and you listen to Channel 3 on CB, FRS, and MERS. Using the Channel 3 plan, You listen for 3 minutes, and if anyone attempts to make contact with you, you can make contact with them in a 3 minute window at 8 times per day. Doing this enables you to save battery power since you have effectively turned your radio on for only 24 minutes throughout the whole entire day. And by doing the Channel 3 plan, you can extend your battery life from maybe a couple days all the way up to a couple weeks, or if you're lucky, a month. Okay, so now that we know how the Channel 3 plan would work in a emergency or a natural or man-made disaster, I'm going to go over some of the few reasons why I like the Channel 3 plan. The first reason I like the Channel 3 plan is that it's designed with license-free radio services in mind, which means that anyone who wants to communicate on Channel 3 can do so. Uh, and that's a great asset because with a Channel 3 plan, a truck driver going down the road could freely relay information to a base station who could relay that to people on FRS and MERS, and so on and so forth. And this enables basically anyone who wants to be able to help communicate in times of disaster, communicate, because let's face it, not everybody's an amateur radio operator, and I'm sure there are a few people in your family who may not be interested in getting their license or who haven't yet gotten their license. And since you never know when disaster will strike, the Channel 3 plan is great for those who want to communicate but don't have the amateur radio license or general mobile radio service license to communicate. The second reason I like the Channel 3 plan is because it's compatible with the older and newer CB radios. Now, most of us may know CB radios these days as being 40 channel radios, but believe it or not, before 1977, CB radios were only allocated 23 channels. And while the majority of CB radios today are 40 channel units, for interoperability's sake, it's best to be able to communicate with both the new 40 channel ones and the older 23 channel ones because some of us can't pick which CB we're stuck with. So that's a good reason. And the third good reason why I like the Channel 3 plan is that it enables licensed GMRS operators to communicate with unlicensed FRS operators on the interstitial Channel 3. And that's also an asset to emergency communication. And last but not least, since you're only monitoring and talking every 3 hours for 3 minutes, it enables you to have time to do other things that you might need to do. After all, part of recovering from an emergency situation or a natural or man-made disaster involves doing some work, whether it's pulling people out of collapsed buildings or cutting off trees with a chainsaw that are blocking the road. We all have chores we have to do during a natural or man-made disaster, and if we had to stand in front of a radio desk for every hour for 3 minutes, well, we'd probably never get anything done. Okay, here's my brief little tidbit on the amateur radio calling frequencies, which I think should also be monitored in addition to the Channel 3 plan channels. 146.52 is the VHF 2-meter calling frequency, and 446 megahertz is the designated UHF calling frequency on the 70 centimeter band. These two frequencies are designed, obviously, to allow hams to call each other over simplex. Much the way a CB operator would use channel 19 to make contact with others on the road. However, one of the things I see is that everyone has these frequencies programmed in their radios, but the problem is they almost never monitor them, if any. And I'll say from personal experience, I've used them before, but normally it's only after we've made contact on a repeater and wish to do simplex communication with one another. And I think that's something that should really change because if we all monitored 146.52 or 446 megahertz, I think it would make a difference in amateur radio because While a lot of us may know our local repeaters, there are people who could be traveling out of town who don't necessarily know what offset frequency or what PL tone they need to use to access the local 2 or 70 centimeter repeater. And I think that's something that needs to be addressed because not everyone can flip through a repeater book while they're driving down the interstate. That would be a very bad scenario. So, my little shout out here is to just please use the VHF and the UHF calling frequencies and please monitor them because you never know who may be calling on there. After all, it's not always just a person wanting travel assistance. It could be another fellow ham who happens to be able to use simplex, who is in distress and who needs to get in contact with somebody. And quite frankly, 146.52 and 446 megahertz are both designed wonderfully for this purpose of common communication. So if we could all start monitoring it like you would monitor channel 19 on the interstate, I think we could solve a problem with out of town people who come through areas and need to be able to communicate with other fellow hams. Okay, so here's some other helpful info in addition to the stuff we've just gone over. As we discussed before, Channel 19 is a common channel that just about every truck driver monitors when rolling down the interstate or a major highway. And I'd say about 95% of communications on CB can be initiated on Channel 19. Now, Channel 9 is technically the designated CB emergency channel, but not many people monitor this channel. React is an organization which is known for monitoring this channel, usually, but one of the problems I've seen is that in recent years it seems that foreign operators or just belligerent operators in general on CB will use channel 9 because it's a clear frequency in complete disregard of the fact that it's for emergency and traveler assistance only. So, while Channel 9 is an emergency channel, good for emergency communications, I'd say you have a better bet of someone finding you on Channel 19 than you do on Channel 9. And in addition to this, many CB radios have a Channel 919 switch, which is a helpful bit of info because with those kind of CB radios, you can have Channel 3 for your Channel 3 plan in the frequency bank, and if you want to talk on 19, you just flip the switch back and forth to whatever channel you need it on. Really speeds things up. But another thing is that on the unlicensed frequencies, you use a handle, which could be anything. We probably know about handles from the 1978 movie Convoy, but a handle can be anything. Case in point, in my video there, uh, Romeo Bravo 178, that's a handle. And also to notice is that when you do get on the radio, whether it's amateur radio or on the unlicensed frequencies, pronounce letters using the NATO phonetic alphabet. And another little tidbit here is that most truck drivers who are monitoring Channel 19, their handle is often the name of the trucking company they work for. Uh, I'd say you can call out their company name. I've done this before. If you want to talk to a specific truck, what you'll do is you'll say JB Hunt or CR England, and generally they will respond back to you, and you can address them in that way and initiate conversation with them that way. It's a helpful tidbit. And here's another tidbit, last but not least, is that once you establish channel 3 contact and the channel 3 plan, it's advisable that you move your conversation to another channel or another frequency in the case of ham, because we want to keep channel 3 open for people who may need to use it for emergency purposes or for some assistance. So before we close, here are a couple safety tips. Anything that you say over the radio is capable of being received by anyone. Nothing is private. And if you're going to talk with truck drivers and ask for assistance, the majority of them are very nice people, and I've met a couple. I'm sure you may know one or two, but I know a couple, and for the most part, they're decent people, and they'd be willing to go the extra mile to help out the person in distress. A lot of them are veterans, retired law enforcement, some of them are. But basically, a lot of them are good people. But, as always, beware the bad apple in the bunch. Every profession has a bad apple. And that's just what you need to be aware of whenever you're dealing with some stranger you're talking to on the CB radio. And speaking of talking to people on the radio, if you ever arrange to meet someone up in person with you on the radio in a disaster scenario or during a civil emergency, make sure you bring a buddy with you, and if you can, make sure you bring some personal protection of some kind. And please make sure you meet in a public place, if possible, during the daytime, if the situation warrants it. This is common sense, folks. And, in conclusion, the Channel 3 plan is a great way to establish communications in peacetime and disaster scenarios. The Channel 3 plan will help save battery life because of the way it's structured, which is a great thing when you have limited amount of resources in a disaster. As I said before, amateur radio operators have 2 dedicated calling frequencies. Please use them and please monitor them frequently. And last but not certainly least, and the best adage I live by is the old Scout motto of be prepared.